This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Hi, all. Thanks so much for joining us for Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein, and I'm really glad you're here with us today because it is a topic that so many of us parents are struggling with right now with our kids. Anxiety. It is at an epidemic level since the pandemic, and there are so many different ways that it shows up. So today we're talking specifically about social anxiety, what that is, why it may be happening, and what we can do to help and support our kids. Rebecca Hoffmann is back with us. She walked us through identifying and helping our children through debilitating anxiety in the Anxiety Epidemic episode a couple months ago. Definitely be sure to check that out in our episode list. But she is such an incredible resource. Rebecca is the director of MaineHealth Center for Trauma, Resilience, and Innovation. She's a longtime therapist. And, she's a mom who understands what we are navigating when it comes to this. There are so many good takeaways if you have a child struggling with social anxiety or you know one who is. Let's jump in. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming back and being with us. This topic is, it's important to me to dive into just personally, because I do have a child who struggles with this. But social anxiety really seems like it could be very common. I mean, I've been anxious in social situations. I think most of us have, right?
Absolutely. It's very common, and especially with kids at certain ages where they're entering into a new developmental level or they're entering into a new rite of passage, like going to school or daycare. It's historically been part of life, right? To have some social anxiety.
So what is social anxiety exactly, and how does it differ from, more of a generalized anxiety?
Social anxiety differentiates from generalized anxiety because it's really fear of social situations. So it's fear of maybe being judged by others, being scrutinized, going out in public, meeting new people. It's really those new social situations versus anxiety, which could be a fear of dogs or fear of something very specific, or just in general, fear of everything. It's much more broad.
Okay, so this is very specific to interacting with other humans,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Yeah.
How prevalent is it among kids specifically? Because social anxiety impacts people of all ages, but how prevalent is it among kids? And is there an age in which you might start seeing signs more than others?
I don't know off the top of my head what the prevalence data is of social anxiety. And especially now when we're post-pandemic, social anxiety, the prevalence is much higher than it was before. All kids go through some phase in their life of being socially anxious, right? So that's different than an anxiety disorder, which is a mental health diagnosis. So it's very normal for kids at different ages of development to have some social anxiety, some fear of interactions, but to have it to the point that it limits their ability to have those social interactions is where it becomes an issue. We're seeing anxiety increase, as we've discussed. It's an epidemic. Anxiety is an epidemic now in kids. And social anxiety is really a huge part of that because of the pandemic, really, because kids were isolated at very important parts of their development.
Are you seeing that with specific ages more than others? I know we both have sixth graders, and this is anecdotal. I don't know, but of all three of my kids, I feel like the isolation impacted him more than others, I guess. And part of that, and this is just my own trying to figure out what's going on just as a parent, is my daughter, she was of the age where she had cell phones and they were doing that house party app and they were FaceTiming. They were still socially connected. It wasn't ideal. It was still over screens mostly. But my son at that time, being, I think he must have been around 7, he was not on any social media. He was still of the age where he would, it was quite dependent on parents setting up play dates. And we had recently moved, so we didn't have kids in the neighborhood and all of those things. So and then my youngest was a baby, like a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, a toddler. So, he will have no memory of it. But are there certain ages that you are finding that this isolation impacted more than others?
Yes. So I think you are describing an age group. And again, this is in reference to the pandemic specifically. So that age group of, let's say, I want to say maybe 5 to 8, 4 to 8, maybe, where that's an age where social interactions are so important to development. It's an age where kids are starting school. It's that age where kids are starting to have friends, right? Like real friends, not just the kid that their parent sets them up with at the playground to play with, but kids that they want to be with. So they missed a part in that sort of elementary school, even a little pre-elementary school development that was where social interactions were actually social emotional learning is the most important thing at that age. That's my professional, personal opinion. When your children are going into pre-kindergarten through 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, social emotional learning is what they are going to need to be able to function well as adults. And schools have really gotten into the mindset that they need to teach that social emotional learning, that it needs to be part of the curriculum for kids, that they're not necessarily getting it elsewhere. Well, they really didn't get it in the pandemic. I think for parents, especially for working parents who were trying to make it all work, that was an age group where they didn't yet have connections, but they were young enough where we as parents weren't so worried about their connections, right? Because they hadn't had them yet. So I just can speak from my own experience of having two children that were within that age group. I didn't worry about setting up Zoom calls with them, with friends. That wouldn't have been a form of play for them, right? Whereas a little bit older kids cannot interact that way. But so they missed a huge piece of that, the most important part of learning in that age group.
Yeah, I've got the chills as you're talking because, I kind of thought, oh, well, at least there's, they have each other as siblings to hang out and play with. And thank goodness, definitely not trying to discount that at all, but just missing out on that unobstructed, like playing on the playground, running around the neighborhood, getting into trouble, a little bit. So pandemic and coming out of that is a huge trauma that could lead to social anxiety. What are some of the other triggers or causes of social anxiety?
Some common reasons why a child might have social anxiety, a few for just some examples. A child that is more prone to anxiety in general. So we sort of think of broad anxiety, but then there are sort of areas that a child might be anxious in, but they're sort of prone to being anxious. And so children that are prone to being anxious in general might be more likely to have social anxiety be the form of anxiety that they have. I would also say, so children who have, historically, we often thought of them as very shy, and that is not social anxiety. There are children that are shy, they're quieter, they're maybe introverts by nature. But again, when it gets to the place where it really limits or inhibits their ability to grow and develop and interact is when it starts to become a problem. So I would say that children that are prone to being very shy and very anxious, you might worry that could develop into something a little bit more broad, more like a social anxiety issue. Children who have trauma histories, who have not learned the skills of how to interact with other people because their brain development was limited by their trauma, might be more likely to have social anxiety. So, for example, a child that didn't get their needs met at a very early age, those children are more likely in general to develop anxiety or really fears, just their body's in kind of a constant fear state. And so that could turn into social anxiety. Children who are facing issues like bullying, obviously, would be a huge cause of social anxiety. Children who have been bullied or are being bullied, that's actually social anxiety is really their body's protective reaction, right? It's protecting them from those experiences. The issue is that those kids will potentially generalize it to all social interactions.
So we talked about peers, we talked about trauma, parental styles. I mean, there are different types of parental styles. You don't quote me on all of them because I don't know. I don't want to be on the spot and list them all, but specific to parenting styles, does one or two particular parenting styles tend to lead to children experiencing social anxiety?
Yes. So what I would say is that children need to develop what we call distress tolerance. They need to be able to develop the ability to be uncomfortable with something and work through it. So a parenting style where we fix everything for them, right? I think, there's all these terms, right? The lawnmower parent, where it clears the way for the child, or the helicopter parent. I mean, there's all these terms nowadays. But if we're constantly fixing things all the time for children, they are not going to learn the skills to handle distress. So if a child is prone to being shy or prone to even social anxiety, they need to be introduced to situations that are going to allow them to learn the skills to manage that. In addition, children need to learn that their emotions, what they are actually feeling, is okay. And it's not that what they're feeling isn't okay. It's that we want to help them through what they're feeling. And so parenting styles that really work to deny emotions or stop children from feeling what they're feeling, and often with very best intentions, right? We want to help them, but by limiting their emotions or their expression of emotions, we're actually going to make the problem worse.
Okay, so what are some of the specific signs or symptoms? And I would imagine, and I know some are going to be very mild, some are going to be extreme. So if we could, what would be some of the mild symptoms that, maybe we just should keep an eye on, have in the back of our heads? And then what does it look like when we get to a point where social anxiety is at an extreme?
So there's really a range of what it might look like. And again, I always want to hold that there's a very normative way that children experience new situations. Every child's different. Every child's personality is different. And so a shy child at 5 might end up doing improv comedy as an adult, right?
Yeah.
Like, you never know where kids are going to go with their personalities and their experiences. I don't want to overgeneralize, but children that have shyness to the point that they cannot go into that experience, whatever it might be, that would be something as a parent I'd want to pay attention to. So signs are going to look different for children of different ages. For younger children, it's going to potentially look like refusal to be in social situations, which again, there's a very normative part of that. It's new. It might be scary. It might be a child they don't know. Holding on to that sort of, yes, this is normal, but also you want to pay attention to kids that absolutely refuse social interactions, because social learning, social interactions are part of their development at an age of 2 to 8. As kids get older, isolation is something that we would want to pay attention to as parents. So children that don't, that isolate and don't interact with their peers. As we all know with teenagers, those peer relationships are absolutely their lifeline. And so children that avoid those, we want to pay attention to. School refusal, children that are refusing to go to school, that could be a social anxiety issue. And fear of doing something new that's social that leads to, we often see it as symptoms in the body. So children that have real headaches and stomach aches, but it's coming from anxiety about something social, that's something we want to pay attention to as well.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
How much do you push as a parent? Say for instance, they are having anxiety about going to school or to a party or to any of these, these things that we're talking about. Where is that line of pushing? Because once they see that they're going to be okay, it will be okay, versus like allowing them that space and that they're being true to their feelings, that is a very scary situation, and allowing them to be there. Like that, it's kind of a hard place for parents to be sort of caught wanting to help, and not wanting to hurt.
In terms of pushing, there's no magic line, of course. It would be much easier if there were. What you want to do as a parent is start small, first of all. So if there is, let's say, a child that doesn't want to go over to another kid's house, start smaller than that. Have the other child come to your house, or meet for ice cream with the child, because that's something they might want to do. And so taking whatever the thing is that's so scary, breaking it down into smaller pieces and doing small pieces at a time and building them up. It's like a step ladder. You want to build them up to whatever is causing them fear. Well, at the same time, and again, that's that distress tolerance, right? Like they can't maybe handle this much stress, but let's start here and build them up. Well, you're also teaching them skills to manage that anxiety. So they have then both the experience with the tools and the skills along with it to be able to manage their feelings. The goal is not to take those feelings away. Hopefully with time, with supportive parenting, with therapy if needed, children will be able to learn to maybe not have that anxiety anymore. But our goal with kids is not necessarily to take it away. It's to help them manage their feelings associated with it.
You mentioned therapy and getting help when appropriate. What is the tipping point where you as a parent are like, this is, not something that I think I can help with? Is there something specific we should look for?
First of all, what I would say about therapy for anxiety in general is there are tried and true types of therapy for anxiety for kids and adults that we know work. They've been around forever. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is incredibly effective. As a therapist myself, what I would just always say is therapy isn't for certain people that are completely at sort of the most extreme end. Therapy can be really helpful from a preventative perspective all the way through. When you want to make sure you're getting additional help is when you as a parent feel like you don't necessarily have the ability, the knowledge, the skills, whatever it might be, to help your child through that. And that's not a judgment at all, because these things are hard. They're hard to learn how to help our kids navigate situations. if you're feeling like, I don't know what to do with this, certainly reaching out for help if your child is school age, school counselors, guidance counselors, school social workers can be super helpful. I would say one of the biggest challenges is knowing when it's too much for you to handle. And I think one of the places where it's important to pay attention is if you absolutely cannot get the child with a little time and help to whatever it might be that you're working on. So again, school refusal is a big one, and our kids obviously need to go to school. And so if you're unable to, when partnering with the school, get your child to go, and schools have wonderful methods to help with this. So you wouldn't be the first parent, if someone's out there struggling with this, to have to face this. Work with your school, and if you're unable to solve that issue, then therapy can be very helpful.
So what can we do as parents to best help our kids who are struggling, as a starting point?
So I think there are a few things that can be really helpful as parents. The first, I would say, is gently encouraging, right from when kids are very young, all the way up through teenage years, gently encourage social situations. Again, we're building that distress tolerance. We're introducing social situations as part of life. And also we're modeling it, right? So if we are showing them that we're trying new things as adults, that's really, really helpful for children, because children are always going to do what we do, not what we say. Pushing your own tolerance for new things is important. Praising your child when they try something new and it's scary and they do it, really celebrating that. Acknowledging your child's feelings. So a lot of times we think we want to just ignore that because we want less of it. But when it's a feeling for them, it needs to be acknowledged. We need to say, I know this feels really scary for you. Let's try to do this together, and really work with them. Help them learn calming techniques. So what's happening in their body, the physiological response in their body is real. Helping them to bring down that anxiety, that nervousness, that fear, calming techniques, breathing, connecting with them emotionally, really making eye contact and bringing them into the present moment. And then helping them by talking through it with them when they're calm. So thinking through the experience, why is this scary? And offering guidance to them for ways to make it less scary.
So modeling, praising, acknowledging feelings, and really just focusing on that connection. Is this something kids could potentially outgrow?
Absolutely. They can and outgrow it all the time, for sure. So like any other hurdle that children face in their life, we hope as parents that they can learn the skills to manage it. And when they're faced with it or something similar further down the road, that those skills are transferable and they can bring those with them and use them with that other fear. So absolutely, it's not something that you would necessarily as a parent worry that it could be forever. There are true anxiety disorders, and then there's being anxious. And those are two different things. And so when someone has an anxiety disorder, that might be something that they have for life and that they'll have to address throughout life. And that's real. And then there's being anxious. And that often is something that when it's addressed, it goes away, and then kids have the skills to deal with other situations later.
So that sounds promising for parents who are worried and struggling right now. If there was one takeaway or one thing that we could do if we see our children struggling or suspect that this is something we're developing, what would that be?
First, I'd say we're going to see more of this. We're seeing more of this. Really, the aftermath of the pandemic it was a petri dish for anxiety for kids, especially social anxiety. It just made it so much worse because they weren't getting the normal social interactions that they need to develop appropriately. So we are going to see a lot more of this. What I would say is you're not alone as a parent. Lots of parents are facing issues of social anxiety or fears with their children. Their children didn't get the experiences that would have helped to really almost like vaccinate them from this normal part of life. In the pandemic, children didn't get the social experiences that would have built the building blocks or the step ladder for them to be able to handle bigger things now at a bigger age. So what was a play date for a 4-year-old didn't happen. Those continued not to happen. At 6, they didn't go to school, let's say, and now they're entering middle school and the stakes are higher, right? So it's trying out for sports, it's trying out for plays, it's dealing with social media. It's really big stuff, and they didn't necessarily get the skills to manage that. So what I would say to parents is there is a lot of this. You'll see it in your friends' kids, in, everywhere. Don't ignore it. Pay attention to it because it is real. Your child is definitely experiencing something very difficult, but know that there are tools and there is help out there that can get you through the situation.
Yeah, just this whole idea that just came to me when you're talking about these kids now going out for plays and sports. And we as adults wanted them to go back to what was quote unquote normal so quickly. Maybe we skipped a few steps. Rebecca, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation with us today. Really appreciate it. Of course, I want to let our listeners know too, we'll have more resources on our website, which is wgme.com/raisingme. Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you.
I was so grateful for this conversation with Rebecca. And really the biggest takeaway for me is that we're not alone in this. I worry so much about what I've done wrong or what I could or should do differently when I see my kids struggle. Of course, that's natural for a parent. But so many kids are struggling in ways we have not seen before. And it is so important to support them and really each other in this. For now, in my family, we are working on taking those little steps, just one at a time. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation and for listening to Raising Me. We are so grateful to have recently been named in the top 15 parenting podcasts on the web by FeedSpot. Please let us know if there's a topic you'd like us to cover with an email to raisingme@wgme.com. And follow us, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. We love that. I'm Adrienne Stein. Raising Me is edited by Megan Littlefield and produced with Nate Eldridge. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.